If you are watching this, there is a good chance you have already lost someone, or you will, or you are afraid of losing someone right now. Grief feels like the loneliest thing that happens to a human being. It feels private. It feels heavy. It feels like something we are supposed to carry quietly, alone, until the world gives us permission to stop. But grief was not always like this. In fact, for most of human history, grief was one of the most public, most physical, most communal experiences a person could have. Something has changed, and what changed might be part of the reason that grief today feels so much harder than it should. The strangest thing about grief is that it seems to be older than our species. In 1960, an archaeologist named Ralph Solecki opened a burial site inside Shanidar Cave in the mountains of northern Iraq. Inside, he found the bones of a Neanderthal man, not a Homo sapiens, not us, a different species of human. The man had been buried, deliberately, and in the soil around his body, Solecki found something that would rewrite what we thought we knew: pollen. From at least 7 different species of flowers: yarrow, cornflower, hollyhock, bright-colored blooms laid on top of the body 60,000 years ago. Some researchers have questioned whether the pollen was placed by hand or brought in by rodents. The debate continues, but the possibility is haunting. 60,000 years ago, a species that was not us may have looked at a dead loved one, walked out into a field, gathered flowers, and brought them back. Grief may be older than modern humans, older than language in its current form, older than most of the tools we now consider basic. It seems to be one of the very first things that made us, in any recognizable sense, human. There is another site in Russia called Sungir. It is 30,000 years old, and it might be the most heartbreaking archaeological find on Earth. 2 children were buried there, side by side, a boy of about 10 and a girl of about 8. They had been placed with extreme care. Their bodies were covered in over 10,000 hand-carved beads made of mammoth ivory. Each bead had taken an expert craftsperson roughly an hour to make. 10,000 beads. 10,000 hours. Someone 30,000 years ago sat carving ivory for months to prepare this grave. The children were also given spears, jewelry, sculpted ivory animals, and clothing that would have been extraordinarily expensive by the standards of any Ice Age society. But maybe the most moving detail is not the beads. It is what we can see in the bones. The boy had a badly broken thigh bone that had healed, which means that after the injury he was cared for. Someone fed him. Someone carried him. Someone made sure he survived long enough for the bone to knit back together. Whoever did that for him, whoever loved him enough to keep him alive through a fracture that would have killed most Ice Age children, eventually had to bury him. And they buried him with everything they had. We do not know how the children died. We do not know exactly who they were. But we know that 30,000 years ago, at least one person spent a year of their life turning grief into a ceremony. Human beings have always known what to do with the dead. What has changed is who does it, where, and how. For most of history, when someone died, the body did not leave the family. It stayed, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The people who had loved that person washed the body themselves. They dressed it. They combed the hair. They closed the eyes. They cleaned every part of it slowly with their own hands. The body would be laid out in the main room of the house. Family and neighbors would come to sit with it, not to pass through and offer condolences, to actually stay, sometimes overnight. sometimes for several nights. This is what a wake actually was before it became a short reception in a rented room. It was a vigil, a long, physical, unavoidable encounter with the fact that someone you loved was gone. The person was still present in a strange way during those days. The house still contained them. Grief had somewhere to sit. The washing of the body was not a chore. It was, in almost every culture that practiced it, a final act of care. The last time you would ever do something physical for the person you loved. It moved grief through the hands and out into the world. Anthropologists who study modern industrial funeral practices notice how much of this we have lost. Grief now has no physical outlet at all. The body is taken away by strangers. The hands of the mourner have nothing to do. Almost every ancient culture we have records of built elaborate rituals around this same core moment. The Egyptians spent 70 days preparing a body. Mourning was public. Family cut their hair, rubbed ashes on their skin, wailed loudly enough to be heard from other streets. In ancient Greece, families hired professional mourners, women whose entire job was to come to your house and cry for you. Not because your grief was not real, because grief was heavier than one person could carry alone. Roman funerals were public processions through the streets. Every death was witnessed by the community. Nobody grieved in private. The Norse burned ships. The Chinese built elaborate ancestor shrines that stayed in the home for generations. In Mexico, families still spend one day every year setting out food and photographs for the dead, welcoming them back as guests. Aboriginal Australians have a practice called sorry business. When someone dies, entire communities enter a period of mourning that can last for weeks, months, or even years. The name of the dead person is often not spoken during this time. Photographs may be turned to the wall. The whole world quiets around the loss. Different cultures, different beliefs, different afterlives, or none. But the same underlying instinct, grief, needs a place to live, a shape, a container, a ceremony. The other thing every ancient culture did was tell stories about the dead. Around the fire, in the weeks and months after a death, people would tell every story they knew about the person who had died. Not to make everyone cry, though they did. To keep the person present in some form. To let the community carry the memory together so no single mourner had to hold it alone. This is why oral cultures preserved so much. Every person who died left behind a library of stories, and the community became the library. A dead grandmother could be alive in someone's telling for another 80 years. We stopped doing this. Now the dead are remembered mostly in photographs, and mostly by one or two people, and mostly in silence. What almost all ancient cultures understood is that grief is not a feeling. It is a process. A slow physical process that has to happen somewhere. If you do not give it somewhere to happen, it does not disappear. It just stays inside you. Which is what has quietly become our modern crisis. Somewhere in the last century, we handed grief over to institutions. The dying person is now taken to a hospital. Often they die there, surrounded by strangers, in a room family members visit but do not live in. The body is then handled by professionals who take it away, prepare it, and return it later, cleaned and dressed, in a coffin. The family often never touches the body, never washes it, never closes the eyes. The last physical contact with someone they loved is often a hand on a hospital blanket. The funeral is short, usually 1 or 2 hours. Everyone gathers, cries a little, eats something, and then goes home. The next day, grief begins in earnest, and the mourner is expected to grieve alone. Bereavement leave in most modern workplaces is 3 to 5 days. That is the official amount of time the world gives you to lose someone you loved for 30 years. After that, you are expected to be back at your desk, answering emails, attending meetings, functioning. The unspoken expectation is that grief will be quiet, managed, invisible, that you will process it internally, in your own time, in your own space, without inconveniencing anyone. Studies of modern grief keep finding the same result. The lonelier the mourner, the longer and heavier the grief. And modern mourners are the loneliest in history. 1 in 4 Americans says they have nobody to talk to about their deepest struggles. Widows and widowers under 60 are twice as likely to develop chronic health conditions in the year after a spouse's death. Grief was always going to hurt, but it was not supposed to hurt like this. In 2022, the American Psychiatric Association added a new diagnosis to its Manual of Mental Disorders. It is called prolonged grief disorder. It applies to people whose grief is still severe more than a year after the death of a loved one. Let that sink in for a moment. Modern medicine has now decided that grieving for someone longer than 12 months is a disorder. Something wrong with you. Something that requires treatment. Ancient cultures, in almost every case, would have found this idea absurd. Grief could last as long as it needed to. Sometimes years, sometimes a lifetime. It was not a problem to solve. It was a shape that a life took after loss. There is a line, often attributed to the writer Jamie Anderson, that says, "Grief is love with no place to go." This is exactly what has happened. Ancient humans built entire rituals to give grief somewhere to go. The wake, the vigil, the burning, the burial mound, the professional mourners, the 7 days of sitting, the year of not speaking the name. All of these were containers, ways for a huge, unmanageable feeling to have shape, to move outward through the body and the community instead of staying trapped inside one person. Modern life has removed almost all of those containers and left the grief. That is why it hurts so much. It is not because we love more than our ancestors did. It is not because we feel more deeply. It is because we have inherited an enormous ancient feeling with none of the tools that used to make it survivable. Evolution does not usually preserve feelings that do not serve a purpose. Grief has been with us for at least 60,000 years, probably much longer. It survived because it did something for us. It bound communities together. It made us keep the memory of the dead. It made us care for each other in ways that helped the whole species survive. But that only worked when we had somewhere to put it. Grief without a container is grief eating itself. We grieve in silence, in small apartments, on video calls, in text messages that say, "I am so sorry for your loss," and then trail off into nothing. We take a week off work if we are lucky. We come back. We say, "We are fine." We are not. The good news, if there is any, is that grief still knows what it wants. Your body still knows. Some ancient piece of you still remembers how this was supposed to be handled. Which is why, even now, people gravitate towards small remnants of the old ways. Lighting a candle, keeping a photograph on a shelf, saying the person's name out loud, even when nobody is listening, talking to them in the car. None of that is silly. None of that is denial. That is a 10,000-year-old instinct trying to build a container for something that has nowhere else to go. If you have lost someone, you are allowed to build rituals. Small ones. Anyone's. They do not have to be religious. They do not have to be elaborate. They just have to be yours. You are allowed to grieve for longer than 3 days, or 1 year, or 10 years. Grief is not a disorder. It is what love does when the person is no longer here. Somewhere in your DNA is the memory of what to do. Someone in your ancestry, 30,000 years ago, spent months carving ivory beads for a child they loved. Someone in your ancestry sat by a body for 3 days and did not leave. Someone in your ancestry knew exactly what to do with a feeling this big. That knowledge is still in you. It just does not have a home anymore. If this made you think, hit like. And if someone you loved is on your mind right now, this video is for them. Subscribe if you want more small, strange questions about being a human. And take care of yourself tonight, as much as you can.